The alarm clock went off at 4:30 in the morning, just like it had every workday for the past 30 years. Robert Hayes reached over and silenced it, with the same practiced motion he'd done thousands of times before. His wife, Catherine, stirred beside him but didn't wake. She was used to his early schedule by now. Robert got up, dressed in his work clothes, and headed to the kitchen to make his coffee. The house was quiet, peaceful even. These early morning hours were his favorite time of day. By 5:15, Robert was pulling into the parking lot of Henderson Auto Repair. The sun hadn't come up yet, and the street was empty except for a few delivery trucks making their rounds. He unlocked the front door, flipped on the lights, and took a deep breath. The smell of motor oil, rubber, and metal filled his lungs. Some people might have found it unpleasant, but to Robert it smelled like home. This garage had been his second home for 3 decades. He'd spent more waking hours here than anywhere else in his life. Robert walked through the shop, checking each bay, making sure everything was ready for the day ahead. He'd been doing this job since he was 25 years old. Back then, he'd been young and eager, fresh out of technical school with dreams of becoming the best mechanic in town. Old Mr. Henderson had hired him on the spot, after seeing how carefully Robert handled a tricky transmission job during his interview. That was 1995, and the world was different then. Cars were simpler. Customers were different too. And Robert had a full head of dark hair instead of the gray that covered it now. Over the years, Robert had seen everything. He'd worked on rusted-out trucks that barely held together, brand-new luxury cars with mysterious electrical problems, and vintage classics that needed patient, loving care. He'd pulled all-nighters to finish emergency repairs for customers who desperately needed their cars. He'd diagnosed problems that had stumped other mechanics for weeks. He'd even talked to nervous teenage drivers through their first flat tire changes over the phone, giving them confidence when their parents couldn't be reached. The other mechanics started arriving around 6:30. There were 5 of them now, not counting Robert. Tommy was the youngest at 23, fresh out of school and still learning the ropes. Robert had taken him under his wing, teaching him the same way Mr. Henderson had taught Robert all those years ago. Then there was Pete, who'd been there for 12 years and specialized in electrical systems. Carlos handled bodywork and paint jobs. Dave was the diagnostic expert with all the computer equipment. And Vincent managed the front desk, dealing with customers and scheduling appointments. They all called Robert by a nickname that had stuck over the years. Magic Man, they'd say when he walked into the break room. It had started as a joke years ago when Robert had fixed a car that 3 other shops had given up on. The customer's teenage son had called him a magician, and the name had evolved from there. Robert always laughed it off, but secretly he was proud of it. It meant his skills were recognized. It meant he'd earned respect through hard work and dedication. The morning started like any other Tuesday. A young mother brought in her minivan because it was making a strange knocking sound. Robert listened to the engine for less than 30 seconds before identifying a failing motor mount. An elderly gentleman arrived with his sedan, worried about a grinding noise when he braked. Robert took it for a test drive, confirmed the brake pads needed replacing, and gave him an honest estimate. A contractor showed up with his work truck saying it was overheating. Robert popped the hood and immediately spotted a cracked radiator hose. This was Robert's gift. While other mechanics might need an hour of diagnostics and computer scans, Robert could often identify problems within minutes just by listening, looking, and using the knowledge he'd accumulated over 30 years. He didn't rely solely on fancy equipment, though he knew how to use it all. He relied on experience, intuition, and a genuine understanding of how vehicles worked. Every car had its own personality, its own quirks. Robert had learned to read them like other people read books. By mid-morning, something felt different in the shop. Vincent came back from the front office looking worried. "Robert, can I talk to you for a second?" he asked quietly. They stepped into the break room, away from the noise of the garage. Vincent lowered his voice even more. "Did you hear? Mr. Henderson sold the business." Robert felt his stomach drop. He'd heard rumors over the past few months, but Mr. Henderson had always dismissed them when Robert asked directly. The old man was in his 70s now and had been talking about retirement for years, but Robert had assumed he'd give everyone a heads up before actually going through with the sale. "When?" Robert asked. "To who?" Vincent shook his head. "Apparently it happened last week. Some big corporate chain called AutoFix Premier. They own like 200 locations across the country. The new regional manager is supposed to be coming by today to introduce himself. Robert returned to work, but his mind was racing. Change was never easy, especially for someone who'd spent 30 years building a reputation at one place. He tried to push the worry aside and focus on the brake job he was working on. The customer was a single father who needed his car fixed quickly so he could get to work. Robert wasn't going to let his own concerns affect the quality of his work. The new regional manager arrived just after lunch. His name was Derek Hastings, and he looked nothing like Mr. Henderson. Where the old owner had been warm and grandfatherly, wearing flannel shirts and work boots, Derek wore an expensive suit and carried a leather briefcase. He was probably in his mid-30s, with perfectly styled hair and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He gathered everyone in the garage for a brief meeting. "I'm excited to be here," Derek announced, his voice loud and confident. "AutoFix Premier is all about efficiency, customer satisfaction, and profitability. We're going to make some changes around here to bring this location up to our standards. Nothing to worry about. We're going to make this place even better than it already is." Robert noticed that Derek kept checking his watch during his own speech, as if he had somewhere more important to be. When the meeting ended, Derek didn't stick around to talk to anyone individually. He just climbed into his luxury sedan and drove off, leaving a cloud of uncertainty behind him. The changes started the very next day. Derek returned with a clipboard and a stopwatch. He began timing how long each repair took. He questioned every part that was ordered, asking if there were cheaper alternatives available. He introduced new paperwork that had to be filled out for every job, adding at least 20 minutes of administrative work to each repair. He brought in a consultant who observed the mechanics working and made suggestions about how they could move faster. Robert tried his best to adapt. He'd been through changes before, but this felt different. Derek didn't seem to care about quality, only speed. He didn't seem to understand that some repairs couldn't be rushed, that taking shortcuts might save time today but create bigger problems tomorrow. When Robert tried to explain this, Derek cut him off. "The numbers don't lie," Derek said, tapping his clipboard. "Our most profitable locations complete jobs 20% faster than this shop does. We need to pick up the pace." Over the next few weeks, the atmosphere in the garage changed completely. The easy camaraderie that had existed between the mechanics disappeared. Everyone was stressed, worried about meeting Derek's quotas. Tommy made mistakes because he was rushing. Pete accidentally ordered the wrong part twice in 1 week because he was trying to work too quickly. Even Vincent at the front desk seemed frazzled, dealing with Derek's constant demands for reports and updates. Robert found himself staying later and later, fixing mistakes that wouldn't have happened if everyone had been allowed to work at a proper pace. He arrived earlier too, trying to get ahead of the day's work. Catherine started worrying about him. Their daughter Jennifer, who was in her second year of college, noticed during a phone call home that her father sounded exhausted. The worst part was watching the shop's reputation suffer. Customers who'd been coming to Henderson Auto Repair for years started complaining. A brake job that Robert would have done perfectly had to be redone because Tommy had rushed through it. A diagnostic that should have taken an hour was cut short, resulting in a misdiagnosis that cost the customer twice as much to fix properly. The online reviews, which had been consistently 5 stars for years, started dropping. 3 stars. 2 stars. Angry customers left detailed complaints about poor service and rushed work. Robert tried talking to Derek about it. He requested a private meeting and laid out his concerns professionally. He brought data showing how the increased mistakes were actually costing the company more money than they were saving through speed. He explained that their customer base valued quality and trusted the Henderson name because of the careful work they'd always done. Derek listened with his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. When Robert finished, Derek leaned back in his chair. "I appreciate your input, Robert. But the problem isn't the new system. The problem is resistance to change. You've been here a long time, and I understand that makes adaptation difficult. But this is how modern auto repair works. Either you get on board or you get left behind." Robert left that meeting feeling something he'd never felt in 30 years at this job. He felt unwelcome. He felt like all his experience, all his knowledge, all his dedication meant nothing to this new management. He was just a number on a spreadsheet, an employee who wasn't meeting efficiency quotas. Things came to a head on a cold Thursday morning in November. Robert arrived at his usual time, 4:30 in the morning, and found Derek's car already in the parking lot. The lights were on in the office. Robert had a sinking feeling in his gut as he unlocked the shop and started his morning routine. At 8 o'clock sharp, Derek emerged from the office with two security guards that Robert had never seen before. "Robert Hayes," Derek said formally, his voice echoing in the garage. The other mechanic stopped working and looked over. "I need you to come to the office, please." Robert wiped his hands on a rag and followed them. His heart was pounding. He'd been through a lot in his life, but he'd never been fired from anything. He'd never even been written up. In the office, Derek gestured to a chair, but Robert remained standing. The security guards stood by the door, their presence making everything feel surreal and threatening. "Robert, we're terminating your employment effective immediately," Derek said, sliding a folder across the desk. "You've consistently failed to meet our performance standards. You've been resistant to new protocols and procedures. Your efficiency ratings are the lowest in the shop. We've tried to work with you, but it's clear that you're not a good fit for AutoFix Premier's culture." Robert stood there stunned. 30 years of perfect attendance, 30 years of satisfied customers, 30 years of going above and beyond, and it was ending like this, in a cold office with security guards present, as if he were some kind of threat. "You're making a mistake," Robert said quietly. "This shop's reputation was built on quality work, not speed." "That's exactly the kind of attitude that's holding us back," Derek replied. "I need you to clean out your locker. These gentlemen will escort you. You'll receive your final paycheck in the mail." Robert walked to his locker in a daze. The other mechanics watched in shock as he packed up his belongings. 30 years fit into one cardboard box, a few photos of his family, his favorite set of wrenches that he'd bought himself, a coffee mug that Jennifer had given him for Father's Day when she was 8, a plaque Mr. Henderson had presented him with on his 20th anniversary. Tommy looked like he wanted to say something, but Robert just shook his head. No point making this worse for the kid. The security guards walked Robert to his truck. Other mechanics were arriving for their shifts, and they stopped in confusion, watching their most experienced colleague being escorted out like a criminal. Robert loaded his box into the passenger seat, climbed into his truck, and sat there for a moment. His hands were shaking. He was 55 years old, and for the first time in 3 decades he had nowhere to go at 4:30 in the morning. He drove home slowly, his mind completely blank. When he pulled into his driveway, Catherine came out onto the porch, surprised to see him. One look at his face and she knew something terrible had happened. She rushed down the steps as Robert got out of the truck, the cardboard box in his hands. He didn't cry. He just stood there holding that box, feeling like his entire identity had been stripped away in 15 minutes. "They fired me," he said simply. "After 30 years, they fired me. The first week after being fired was the hardest." Robert woke up every morning at 4:30 out of habit, his body refusing to accept that he had nowhere to go. He'd lie there in the dark listening to Catherine breathe softly beside him and feel a weight pressing down on his chest. For 30 years he'd known exactly who he was and what he was supposed to do. Now at 55 years old he felt completely lost. Catherine tried to be supportive, but Robert could see the worry in her eyes. They had some savings, but not enough to last more than a few months. The mortgage still needed to be paid. The utilities still came due, and Jennifer's college tuition for next semester was looming over them like a storm cloud. His daughter was studying to become a teacher, and she was doing so well. Robert had promised her she wouldn't have to worry about money, that he'd take care of everything. Now that promise felt like it was built on sand. By the second week, Robert started looking for work. He printed out resumes at the library and drove around to every auto repair shop within 20 miles. At the first place, a young manager who looked barely 30 glanced at his resume and said, "Wow, 30 years at one place. That's impressive, but we're really looking for someone with more recent training in hybrid and electric vehicle systems." At the second shop, they didn't even look at his resume. "We're not hiring right now, sorry." The third place was more honest. "Look, man, I'm going to level with you. You've got great experience, but we can't afford to pay what someone with your background deserves. We hire younger guys fresh out of school because they're cheaper." Robert drove home from that last interview feeling something he'd never felt before. Worthless. His age, which should have been an asset, was working against him. His experience, which he'd spent 3 decades building, was somehow too much. He was overqualified for entry-level positions and too old for management to want to invest in training him on new technologies. It felt like a trap with no way out. The bills started piling up on the kitchen table. Catherine had a part-time job at the local library, but her income barely covered groceries. Robert applied for unemployment benefits, but the process was slow and humiliating. He'd paid into the system his entire working life, and now he felt like a beggar asking for scraps. At night, he'd sit at the kitchen table with a calculator moving numbers around, trying to make their budget work. No matter how he calculated it, they were going to run out of money before he found a new job. Jennifer called home one evening, her voice cheerful as she told them about her classes. Robert tried to sound normal, but Catherine could see him struggling to keep his voice steady. After the call, Jennifer immediately called back. "Dad, what's wrong?" she asked. "You don't sound like yourself." Robert wanted to protect her, to tell her everything was fine, but the words wouldn't come. Catherine took the phone and explained what had happened. There was a long silence on the other end, and then Jennifer spoke, her voice determined. "I'm coming home. I'll take a semester off and get a job. We'll figure this out together." "Absolutely not," Robert said, taking the phone back. "You're not dropping out of school because of me. You're so close to finishing, Jennifer. Don't throw that away. But Dad, you've always been there for me. Let me help for once." "You help by staying in school and getting your degree," Robert said firmly. "That's what helps me. Knowing that you're going to have a better future than I did. Promise me you won't drop out." Jennifer reluctantly agreed, but Robert could hear the tears in her voice when she said goodbye. After he hung up, he went out to the garage and sat in his truck alone in the dark. He'd always been the provider, the one who fixed things, who made everything work. Now he couldn't even keep a roof over his family's head. Meanwhile, back at what used to be Henderson Auto Repair, and was now officially Auto Fix Premier Location 47, things were falling apart. Tommy called Robert a few days after the firing, his voice apologetic and angry. "Robert, I don't know what to do. Everything's a mess here. Derek's got us working so fast that we're making mistakes left and right. Yesterday I had to redo a transmission job because I missed something the first time, and Mrs. Patterson came in screaming because her car died on the highway 3 days after Pete fixed her alternator. It wasn't installed properly because Derek was rushing him." Robert listened, his heart heavy. These weren't just mistakes. These were dangerous problems that could get someone hurt. "Have you talked to Derek about slowing down?" he asked. "Are you kidding? He doesn't listen to anything we say. He just keeps talking about efficiency and numbers. Half the old customers have stopped coming back. The waiting room is empty most days now." After Tommy hung up, Robert sat with the phone in his hand. Part of him felt a bitter satisfaction that Derek's system was failing. But mostly he just felt sad. That shop had been his pride and joy. Watching it fall apart, even from a distance, hurt more than he'd expected. The complaints about AutoFix Premier started spreading through town like wildfire. Robert would go to the grocery store and run into former customers who'd stop him in the aisles.
"Robert, what happened to you?"
They'd ask. "We went to Henderson's last week and they completely messed up our car. We had to take it somewhere else to get it fixed, right? We kept asking for you and they said you didn't work there anymore." Every conversation like that was both validating and painful. Validating because it confirmed that his work had mattered, that people had trusted him specifically. Painful because he couldn't help them anymore. He'd recommend other shops in the area, places he knew did good work, but it felt wrong to send his customers elsewhere. They'd been his responsibility for so long. The online reviews for AutoFix Premier Location 47 told the whole story. Robert had never been big on computers, but Catherine showed him how to look up the reviews on her laptop. The shop that had maintained a near-perfect 5-star rating for years was now sitting at 2 stars. Customer after customer left angry reviews. They used to be great when that older mechanic worked there. Now they rush through everything and don't care about quality. Another one said, "Paid $800 for a repair that didn't fix the problem. Had to take it to another shop and spend another $600. Total waste of money and time." One review particularly stung. It was from Walter Brennan, an elderly man whose car Robert had maintained for over 20 years. Walter had been a loyal customer, always bringing in his old Buick for regular service. His review read, "I don't know what happened to this place, but it's not Henderson Auto Repair anymore. They talked me into repairs I didn't need and charged me twice what Robert would have charged. I asked where Robert was and the manager got defensive. I won't be going back. After 20 years, they've lost my business." Robert showed the review to Catherine. "This is what I was afraid of," he said quietly. "Derek's destroying everything Mr. Henderson built. All those relationships, all that trust gone in a matter of weeks." But knowing Derek was failing didn't pay their mortgage. By the 4th week of unemployment, Robert was getting desperate. He swallowed his pride and applied at big chain stores, places he never thought he'd work. He applied to be a stock clerk at a warehouse. He applied to work at a home improvement store. He even applied to be a delivery driver. Most places never called back. The few that did took one look at his resume and asked why someone with his experience wanted an entry-level job. When he explained he'd been laid off and needed work, they'd nod sympathetically but ultimately choose younger candidates who'd be happy with minimum wage and no benefits. Catherine picked up extra hours at the library, working evenings and weekends. Robert hated watching her come home exhausted, knowing she was working harder because he couldn't find a job. He started doing all the housework, cooking meals, anything to feel useful. But it wasn't enough. He'd spent his entire adult life working with his hands, fixing things, solving problems. Sitting at home while bills piled up made him feel like he was slowly disappearing. The worst moment came when the mortgage payment was due, and they didn't have enough in the bank to cover it. Robert had to call the bank and ask for an extension. The customer service representative was polite but cold, explaining the penalties and fees that would be added. Robert felt his face burning with shame as he agreed to the terms. He'd never missed a payment on anything in his life. He'd always prided himself on being responsible, on keeping his word. Now he was one of those people who couldn't pay their bills on time. That night, Robert couldn't sleep. He got up around 2 in the morning and went to sit in the living room. Catherine found him there an hour later, just staring at the wall. She sat down beside him and took his hand. "We're going to get through this," she said softly. "How?" Robert asked, his voice barely a whisper. "I've applied to 50 places. Nobody wants to hire a 55-year-old mechanic. We're going to lose the house, Catherine. Jennifer's going to have to drop out of school. Everything I worked for is falling apart." "You listen to me, Robert Hayes," Catherine said, her voice firm now. "You are one of the most skilled, dedicated, hard-working men I've ever known. This isn't over. Something's going to come through. You have to believe that." Robert wanted to believe her, but faith was getting harder to hold on to. The next morning, he got in his truck and drove around aimlessly, not sure where he was going. He ended up at the park where he used to take Jennifer when she was little. He sat on a bench and watched young families playing with their kids. He remembered when life felt simple, when working hard meant success, when loyalty meant something. His phone rang. It was Pete from the old shop. "Robert, I quit," Pete said without preamble. "I can't take it anymore. Derek's impossible. He blamed me for a mistake Tommy made because I was supposed to be supervising. I told him I'm a mechanic, not a babysitter." He started yelling and I just walked out. "I'm sorry, Pete," Robert said. "I know you needed that job. It's not a job anymore, it's a nightmare. Carlos is about to quit too. Vincent already gave his 2 weeks' notice. That place is going to completely fall apart." Pete paused. "Robert, do you know of anyone hiring? I'll take anything at this point." Robert felt a surge of frustration. Here was Pete, a skilled mechanic with 12 years of experience, also looking for work because of Derek's mismanagement.
How many good people was that man going to hurt?
"I'll keep my ears open," Robert promised. "If I hear of anything, I'll let you know." After hanging up, Robert sat on that park bench for another hour. He thought about all the customers he'd helped over the years. The single mother whose car he'd fixed for free when he knew she couldn't afford it. The elderly couple he'd given rides home to when their repairs took longer than expected. The teenager he'd taught basic car maintenance to because the kid couldn't afford to keep taking his car to shops. He'd done good work. He'd made a difference in people's lives. That had to count for something, didn't it? But in the real world, in the world of corporate efficiency and profit margins, apparently it didn't count for anything at all. Loyalty was worthless. Experience was a liability. Being good at your job wasn't enough if you didn't fit someone's arbitrary metrics. Robert felt anger building inside him, a feeling he wasn't used to. He'd always been even-tempered, patient, fair. But this situation wasn't fair, and pretending otherwise was getting exhausting. He drove home and found a letter in the mailbox from AutoFix Premier. His final paycheck? He opened it and stared at the amount. 30 years of service, and his severance was exactly what he was legally owed. 2 weeks' pay, no bonus, no recognition, No, thank you. Just a check and a form letter about Cobra insurance options he couldn't afford. That evening, Robert and Catherine sat at the kitchen table going over their finances again. They could make it 2 more months if they were extremely careful. After that, they'd have to start making hard choices. Sell the truck, maybe. Take out a loan against the house if any bank would give them one. The future that had seemed so secure just a few weeks ago now looked terrifying and uncertain. Robert's phone buzzed with a text message. It was from a number he didn't recognize. The message was simple. Is this Robert Hayes, who used to work at Henderson Auto Repair? I'd like to speak with you about an opportunity. Call me when you get a chance. There was a name at the bottom. Lawrence Chen. Robert stared at the message. He didn't recognize the name, but something about it made his heart beat a little faster. Could this be the break they desperately needed? Or was it just another dead end in a long series of disappointments? He showed the message to Catherine. Call him, she urged. What do you have to lose? Robert looked at the clock. It was 8:30 in the evening. Too late to call someone back about business, but the message had said, when you get a chance, and Robert was too desperate to wait until morning. He stepped outside onto the back porch and dialed the number. It rang 3 times before someone answered. This is Lawrence Chen, a voice said. Mr. Chen, this is Robert Hayes. I got your text message. Robert, thank you for calling back so quickly. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. No, sir, not at all. Your message said something about an opportunity. Yes, but this conversation is better had in person. Are you available to meet tomorrow morning? Say 9 o'clock? I own Chen's Import Specialists over on Westside Boulevard. Do you know it? Robert did know it. It was a high-end shop that specialized in luxury and vintage cars. He'd driven past it hundreds of times but had never been inside. Yes, sir, I know where it is. Excellent. I'll see you tomorrow morning then, Robert. And please call me Lawrence. After hanging up, Robert stood on the porch for a long moment. He was afraid to feel hopeful. He'd been disappointed so many times over the past month that hope felt dangerous. But Catherine's words echoed in his mind. Something's going to come through. Maybe, just maybe, this was it. Robert barely slept that night. He kept running through different scenarios in his mind. What did Lawrence Chen want? Was this a real job offer, or was he just looking for free advice? Maybe Chen had heard about Robert's firing and wanted to pick his brain about AutoFix Premier's operations. Or maybe, just maybe, this was the opportunity Catherine had told him to believe in. By 4 in the morning, Robert gave up on sleep and got out of bed. He showered, shaved carefully, and put on his best button-down shirt and clean jeans. Catherine woke up and made him breakfast, though he was too nervous to eat much. You're going to do great, she said, kissing him on the cheek. Just be yourself. That's always been more than enough. Robert arrived at Chen's Import Specialists at 8:45, 15 minutes early. The building was impressive, much larger and newer than Henderson Auto Repair had been. The parking lot had several luxury cars waiting for service. A vintage Porsche, a Tesla, a beautifully restored Corvette. Through the large glass windows, Robert could see a spotlessly clean shop with state-of-the-art equipment. This wasn't just any repair shop. This was the kind of place where serious car enthusiasts brought their prized vehicles. A receptionist greeted him warmly and told him Lawrence was expecting him. She led Robert through the shop, and he couldn't help but notice how organized everything was. Tools hung in their proper places. The floors were clean. The mechanics working looked focused but not stressed. It reminded him of how Henderson Auto Repair used to be, before Derek arrived with his clipboard and stopwatch. Lawrence Chen met him in a comfortable office that overlooked the shop floor. He was a man in his early 50s with graying hair and an easy smile. He shook Robert's hand firmly. Robert, thank you so much for coming.
Please have a seat.
Can I get you some coffee? They sat down with their coffee, and Lawrence got straight to the point. Robert, I'm going to be honest with you. I've been following your career for years. About 8 years ago, I brought my father's 1967 Mustang to Henderson Auto Repair. It was having electrical problems that 2 other shops had tried and failed to fix. You diagnosed it in less than an hour and had it running perfectly by the end of the day. Do you remember that? Robert thought back. He'd worked on so many cars over the years, but he did remember that Mustang. Beautiful car, cherry red, completely original. The problem had been a corroded ground wire that was intermittently breaking the circuit. I remember that car, Robert said. Your father had kept it in amazing condition. That was the car he bought the year I was born, Lawrence said, his voice soft with memory. He just passed away a few months before, and that car was the one thing he left me. When you fixed it, you didn't just repair a vehicle. You helped me hold on to a piece of my father. I never forgot that. Lawrence leaned forward. I've been hearing things around town, Robert. About what happened at Henderson's. About AutoFix Premier letting you go. And I've been hearing from a lot of angry customers who are looking for someone they can trust. Robert shifted in his seat, not sure where this was going. It's been a difficult few weeks, he admitted. I'm sure it has. But here's what I'm thinking. I'm expanding my business. We specialize in high-end and vintage vehicles, and our reputation is growing. But growth means I need help. I need someone who doesn't just know cars, but understands what these vehicles mean to their owners. Someone with integrity who won't cut corners. Someone who can train younger mechanics the right way. Lawrence paused. I need someone like you. Robert felt his heart start to race. Are you offering me a job? Not exactly, Lawrence said. I'm offering you a partnership. 20% ownership of Chen's import specialists. Full authority over all repair operations. You'd make the calls on what work we take, how we price it, who we hire. I handle the business side. You handle the shop floor. And the salary would be competitive with what you were making at Henderson's, plus profit sharing. Robert stared at him, unable to speak. A partnership? Ownership? This was so far beyond what he'd hoped for that his brain couldn't process it. Lawrence, I don't understand. Why would you offer this to someone you barely know? Because I know your work. I know your reputation. And over the past few weeks, I've had at least 20 people ask me if I know where you went. Because they refuse to go back to AutoFix Premier. These are customers with expensive cars who are willing to drive across town for quality service. That's the kind of loyalty you can't buy, Robert. You earned it through 30 years of excellent work. I'd be stupid not to want you as a partner. I don't have money to invest, Robert said quickly. I can't buy into a partnership right now. My finances are... Lawrence held up his hand. I don't need your money. I need your expertise and your reputation. You'd earn your equity through your work. After 5 years, if we both agree this partnership is working, you'd have the option to buy another 10% at a fair market rate. But there's no pressure. I'm not looking for a financial investor. I'm looking for a partner who can help me build something special. Robert's mind was racing. This was everything he'd lost and more. Not just a job, but ownership. Not just a paycheck, but a future. But after everything that had happened with Derek, Robert was cautious. Can I ask why you're expanding? And why now? Good question, Lawrence said, seeming pleased that Robert was thinking critically. The market for specialty vehicle repair is growing. People are keeping their cars longer, especially high-end models. And there's a whole generation of car enthusiasts who want their classic vehicles maintained properly, not butchered by shops that don't understand them. I've got more work than I can handle, and I'm turning away customers every week. But I won't compromise on quality just to take on more volume. That's where you come in. With your expertise, we could add another bay, take on more complex jobs, and maybe even start a training program for young mechanics who want to learn the right way. Everything Lawrence was saying made sense. But Robert had learned a hard lesson about promises from bosses. What about efficiency quotas? Speed metrics? All the things that corporations care about? Lawrence laughed, a genuine sound that filled the office. Robert, I'm not a corporation. I'm a guy who loves cars and wants to run a business the right way. The only metric I care about is customer satisfaction. If a job takes an extra day because you want to do it right, that's fine with me. Our customers don't come here for fast service. They come here for excellent service. There's a big difference. Robert felt something he hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. Real, genuine hope. But he needed to be sure. Can I think about it? Talk it over with my wife? Of course, Lawrence said. Take a few days if you need to, but I hope you'll say yes. I really do. He stood and offered his hand again. How about I show you around the shop? Meet some of the team. No pressure, just so you can get a feel for how we operate. They spent the next hour walking through Chen's import specialists. Lawrence introduced Robert to the 3 mechanics currently working there. They were all young, maybe in their late 20s or early 30s, but they treated their work with care and respect. One of them was working on a vintage Mercedes, carefully removing the engine. Another was diagnosing a problem on a Maserati. The third was detailing a restored Camaro that looked showroom perfect. We take our time here, one of the mechanics told Robert. Lawrence doesn't rush us. If we need to order a special part or research a particular model, He supports that. It's the best shop I've ever worked in. As Lawrence walked Robert back to the office, they passed by a workspace that was clearly being prepared for expansion. New equipment was still in boxes. Fresh tool chests waited to be organized. This would be your area, Lawrence said. We're setting up 2 more bays. You'd have complete authority over how you want to organize it. Robert drove home in a daze. He kept waiting for the catch, for the moment when this opportunity would reveal itself to be too good to be true. But it never came. Lawrence seemed genuine. The shop was legitimate and the offer was real. When he got home, Catherine was waiting anxiously. He told her everything and she started crying with relief and joy. Call him back right now, she insisted. Tell him yes, I want to, Robert said. But I'm scared, Catherine. What if it doesn't work out? What if I'm not good enough for high-end cars? What if— Stop, Catherine interrupted. You're good enough. You've always been good enough. Derek Hastings was wrong about you. Don't let what he did make you doubt yourself. That evening, Jennifer called. When they told her about the offer, she screamed so loud that Robert had to hold the phone away from his ear. Dad, this is amazing. This is perfect. You have to take it. Robert spent the next 2 days researching Chen's import specialists. He talked to other mechanics in town who knew Lawrence. Everyone said the same thing. Lawrence Chen was fair, honest, and passionate about cars. His shop had an excellent reputation. He treated his employees well and his customers better. Every piece of information Robert gathered confirmed what his gut was already telling him. This was the real deal. On the 3rd day, Robert called Lawrence and accepted the offer. They met that afternoon to sign the partnership papers. Lawrence's lawyer had drawn up a contract that was fair and protective of both parties. Robert wished he could afford his own lawyer to review it, but the terms were straightforward and reasonable. 20% ownership, full operational authority, competitive salary, profit sharing. It was everything Lawrence had promised. Welcome to Chen's Import Specialist, partner, Lawrence said, shaking Robert's hand after they'd both signed. Robert started work the following Monday. His first task was to help set up the new bays and organize the workspace exactly how he wanted it. Lawrence gave him a budget and complete freedom. Robert ordered tools, organized part storage, and set up systems that would keep everything running smoothly. It felt incredible to have that level of trust and authority. Within the first week, something interesting started happening. Word spread through town that Robert Hayes was working at Chen's Import Specialists. His old customers from Henderson Auto Repair started calling. Walter Brennan, the elderly man with the Buick, was one of the first. Robert, I heard you're at Chen's place now. Is it true? It's true, Walter. How's the Buick running? Not good. AutoFix Premier charged me for work they didn't do right. Can I bring it to you? Absolutely. Come by this week and we'll take care of you. Over the next few weeks, more and more of Robert's former customers made the switch. Some drove an extra 20 minutes across town just to have Robert work on their cars. Lawrence was thrilled. You're bringing in exactly the kind of customers I hoped for, he said. People who value quality and are willing to pay for proper service. Robert also convinced Tommy and Pete to apply at Chen's Import Specialists. Lawrence interviewed them both and hired them immediately. If you trust them, that's good enough for me, Lawrence told Robert. With Tommy and Pete on board, the team felt complete. Robert started training them on the specialized work that Chen's shop did, teaching them the patience and precision required for vintage and luxury vehicles. The work was challenging in the best possible way. High-end cars required different knowledge and skills. Robert found himself learning new things every day, researching unfamiliar models and solving complex problems. But this time, he had the time and resources to do it right. No one was standing over him with a stopwatch. No one was rushing him to meet arbitrary quotas. He could focus on doing excellent work, and that made all the difference. Meanwhile, the news from AutoFix Premier Location 47 kept getting worse. Carlos quit just like Pete had predicted. Vincent, the front desk manager, finished his 2 weeks and left. Derek had to bring in mechanics from other AutoFix Premier locations just to keep the shop running. But the damage to the reputation was done. Customers continued to leave negative reviews. Several people had threatened lawsuits over botched repairs. One afternoon, Robert was working on a particularly tricky fuel injection problem on a vintage Jaguar when his phone rang. It was a number he didn't recognize. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. "Is this Robert Hayes?" a woman's voice asked. "Yes, this is Robert. Mr. Hayes, my name is Patricia Cole. I'm the Regional Director for AutoFix Premier. I oversee Derek Hastings. I was hoping we could talk. Robert's grip tightened on the phone. What about? About coming back to work for us. We've realized that some mistakes were made, and we'd like to offer you your position back at location 47. Same job, same pay. We're prepared to start you immediately. Robert stood there in the shop, surrounded by the tools he'd carefully organized, working for a man who trusted and respected him, with 20% ownership of a growing business. He thought about Derek escorting him out with security guards. He thought about the humiliation, the financial stress, the nights lying awake wondering how he'd pay his bills. Ms. Cole, Robert said calmly, I appreciate the offer, but I'm going to decline. I'm a partner at Chen's Import Specialist now, and I'm very happy here. There was a pause on the other end. A partner? Mr. Hayes, I'm sure whatever arrangement you have there is nice, but AutoFix Premier is a major corporation with benefits, security, and growth opportunities. We can even discuss a raise. I understand, Robert said, but money isn't everything. I work with people who respect me here. People who understand that quality matters more than speed. That's worth more than any raise you could offer. After he hung up, Lawrence walked over. He'd overheard the conversation. They want you back? They do, Robert confirmed. But I'm not going anywhere. This is where I belong. Lawrence smiled and clapped him on the shoulder. Good, because we've got big plans ahead, partner. Big plans. Robert returned to the Jaguar with a lightness in his chest that he hadn't felt in months. He'd lost a job, but he'd found something better. A partnership. A purpose. And proof that doing good work for 30 years really did matter, even when it didn't seem like it. Derek had tried to reduce him to a number on a spreadsheet, but Robert had always been more than that. And now finally he was working somewhere that recognized his true value. 3 months had passed since Robert became a partner at Chen's Import Specialists, and the transformation had been remarkable. The shop was busier than ever, with appointments booked out 2 weeks in advance. Robert's reputation had brought in a steady stream of loyal customers, and word-of-mouth recommendations brought even more. The expanded bays were fully operational, and the team worked together like a well-oiled machine. Robert found himself genuinely happy for the first time since his firing. But across town, AutoFix Premier Location 47 was in serious trouble. The situation had deteriorated so badly that it became the talk of the local business community. Robert heard updates through the grapevine, through former customers, and occasionally through texts from mechanics who still worked there under Derek's management. Each piece of news was worse than the last. The breaking point came when a customer's brake job was done so poorly that the car failed to stop properly at an intersection. Thankfully, no one was seriously injured, but the resulting lawsuit was substantial. The customer's lawyer was thorough and aggressive, pulling maintenance records that showed a pattern of rushed work and inadequate quality control. Local news picked up the story, running a segment about auto repair safety that featured AutoFix Premier prominently. The negative publicity was devastating. Derek had tried bringing in mechanics from other AutoFix Premier locations, but they never lasted long. Some quit within weeks, unable to meet the impossible quotas. Others transferred out, requesting assignments anywhere but location 47. The constant turnover meant that nobody knew the regular customers, nobody understood the local market, and mistakes kept happening. Equipment broke down and wasn't repaired properly. The waiting room, once full of customers, often sat empty. The parking lot that used to overflow now had plenty of spaces available. Meanwhile, Chen's Import Specialist was thriving in ways that surprised even Lawrence. Robert had implemented training programs for Tommy and Pete, teaching them the intricacies of working with high-end vehicles. Both young mechanics were flourishing under Robert's mentorship, developing skills they never would have learned at AutoFix Premier. The shop's reputation grew beyond just vintage and luxury cars. Regular customers started bringing their everyday vehicles too, trusting Robert's judgment more than they trusted any corporate chain. One Tuesday afternoon, Lawrence called Robert into his office. He looked excited but also slightly nervous. Robert, I need to talk to you about something big. Really big. Robert sat down curious. In their 3 months working together, he'd learned that when Lawrence got excited about something, it was usually worth paying attention to. What's going on? I got a call yesterday from AutoFix Premier corporate headquarters. Not the regional office, the actual corporate headquarters in Chicago. They want to meet with us. Robert felt his stomach tighten. About what?
About location 47.
Apparently the situation there is worse than we thought. They're losing massive amounts of money every month. The lawsuit from the brake job incident is going to cost them significantly. Their reputation in this area is completely destroyed. And here's the interesting part. Lawrence leaned forward. They know that a lot of their former customers are now coming to us. They've been tracking the numbers and they see the correlation between your hiring date and their customer losses. So what do they want? To sue us for stealing their customers? No, Lawrence smiled. They want to sell us location 47. Robert sat back in his chair, stunned. They want to sell it to us? Why would we want that place? That's exactly what I said at first. But hear me out. The location itself is valuable. It's in a great spot with high traffic visibility. The building is solid. And despite everything Derek did, the Henderson Auto Repair name still means something to people in that neighborhood. People still remember what it used to be. Lawrence pulled out a folder and opened it. Corporate wants to cut their losses. They're willing to sell us the property, the equipment, and the business for significantly less than what it's worth. They just want out. What about Derek? He'd be gone. That's non-negotiable as far as I'm concerned. But here's what I'm thinking, Robert. What if we bought it and restored it? Brought back the Henderson Auto Repair name, hired good people, ran it the right way. We could have 2 locations, both built on quality and integrity. You'd oversee operations at both shops. We'd be partners in both businesses. Robert's mind was racing. The idea of going back to that building, the place where he'd spent 30 years of his life, was emotionally complicated. But the idea of rescuing it from what Derek had done, of restoring it to what it used to be, that was appealing. How much are they asking?